Welcome to Vintage Views and Tunes, where we travel through time from ancient history to the present. For a visual experience, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. Now let's dive into today's story.
It all starts with this book. 17th century, massive, full of maps, engravings, all about the Americas.
Oh, I love those old maps. They're like windows into how people saw the world back then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this book, America, by John Ogilby, published in 1671.
Ogilby. Rings a bell. He was a big deal, right?
Huge. Not just maps. He was a printer, publisher, translated stuff, known for these really beautiful, detailed books.
So what's the story hidden in this particular book?
Okay, so picture this. You're flipping through this massive book, tons of text, maps, all kinds of stuff, and then, bam, this image stops you in your tracks.
Ooh, what is it? One of those detailed engravings.
Totally. And it's not just any engraving. It shows this tall mast, right? Like super high. And on top, a whole platform built onto it.
Wow, a platform on a mast. That's not something you see every day. What's going on up there?
Right. And around the mast, there are all these people. They're gathered, looking up, and you can just tell something important is happening.
Okay, now I really want to know, what's the context? What does the book say about this image?
Well, before I tell you, you got to remember, these engravings back in the 17th century, they weren't just there for decoration.
I know, right? They were like a way to communicate complex ideas to a European audience that had never even, set foot in the Americas.
Exactly. So every detail, the placement, the size, everything was intentional. They were trying to convey a message.
So what message is this engraving trying to send?
Okay, brace yourself, because the caption under this picture, it's a mouthful. Ready?
Hit me with it.
A high mast should be erected with a scaffold on the top, which made everyone suppose that Montezuma's brother did in that manner aim at high election, but...
Whoa, hold on. Moctezuma, as in Moctezuma, the Aztec emperor.
You got it.
But I thought, didn't Moctezuma II die like decades before this book was even published? Right, so we've got Montezuma's brother aiming for high election, whatever that means. But you're right, Moctezuma II, he's long gone by 1671.
Yeah, this image, it's not a flashback or anything. This is happening after the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire.
Okay, so then what are we looking at here? Who is this Montezuma's brother?
Well, there are a few possibilities, and to be honest, Ogilby isn't super clear on the specifics.
Of course not. That's why we're here, to dig into the mystery.
Right. But here's the thing. Even though we don't have a name, this mention of Montezuma's brother, it tells us something really important.
What's that?
It suggests that indigenous systems of leadership, they didn't just vanish after the Spanish arrived.
That's a really good point. We often think about colonization as this, clean break. But this image, it suggests something messier, more complicated.
Totally. It's like even after the conquest, there were still these power dynamics at play, these questions of legitimacy and authority.
And who gets to decide, right? Who gets to be in charge?
Exactly. And this high election, it adds another layer to the puzzle, because election in the 17th century, it didn't always mean what we think of today.
Oh, yeah, good point. It wasn't always about voting and ballots and all that.
Right. It could be about lineage, divine, yeah, even just straight up force. So is this image showing us an actual election, a challenge to the Spanish, or something else entirely? We don't know for sure.
This is why I love historical mysteries. So many possibilities. But we do have some clues, right?
Yep. And this is where things get really interesting. Because remember, we talked about how Ogilby, he wasn't working in a vacuum. He drew on other sources for his book.
True, he wasn't out there exploring the Americas himself. So who was he getting his info from?
One of his primary sources, a Dutch writer named Arnoldus Montanus, published a book a few years before Ogilby, also about the Americas, also full of engravings.
Okay, so this Montanus guy, he's our next lead. What do we know about him?
Well, let's just say Montanus, he wasn't shy about expressing his opinions. And his depictions of indigenous cultures, they were often, how do I put this?
Let's just say a bit sensationalized.
Exactly. He definitely had a flair for the dramatic. Okay, so we've got this image, we've got the caption, we've got Montanus lurking in the background with his, shall we say, interesting take on things. But how do we tie it all together?
Well, this is where things get really fun, because remember, we're talking about engravings here. And engravings, they're not just about what you show, it's about how you show it.
You're talking about that visual language again. Every detail is telling a story.
Exactly. And Ogilby, He was a master of this. Think about it. The size of the figures, the way they're arranged, even the use of light and shadow. He's using all of these techniques to guide your eye, to make you see the scene in a particular way.
Okay, so let's put on our art critic hats for a minute. Walk me through it. What's Ogilby doing in this image?
All right, well, first, look at where that platform is, the one where Moctezuma's brother is standing. It takes up, like, the entire top half of the engraving. It's huge, it's central, and it's bathed in light. What does that tell you?
Well, it definitely makes that platform and whoever's standing on it seem important, like they're at the center of everything.
Exactly. And then you've got those figures below, looking up. Ogilby is playing with perspective here, creating this sense of hierarchy, even if it's not explicitly stated.
And then there's that mast itself, so tall, so imposing. It's almost like it's reaching towards the heavens or something.
Right. It's hard not to see it as a symbol of ambition, maybe even a connection to the divine, especially in the context of this high election.
So we're not just talking about a political process here. It's about something grander, more symbolic.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Remember how we talked about Montanus? How he often exaggerated his depictions of indigenous cultures? Well, Ogilby, he does something similar here, but in a much more subtle way.
Really? But his engravings, they seem pretty realistic to me.
They are, but look closely. The clothing, the headdresses, even the posture of the figures. Ogilby is playing with these details to create a sense of the exotic, the otherworldly. He's tapping into those 17th century European ideas about what indigenous cultures were like.
So even though he's not directly copying Montanus, he's still using those same techniques to, like, influence how people see this image.
Exactly. It's all about context, right? Ogilby knew his audience. He knew what would resonate with them.
This is blowing my mind. It's like every little detail in this engraving is telling a story.
And that's what's so amazing about historical sources. They're like puzzles. It's not just about what's on the surface, it's about digging deeper, looking for those hidden meanings.
Okay, so we've explored the image, we've dissected the caption, we've even channeled our inner art historians. What's the verdict? What can we learn from this one little engraving?
Well, I think it reminds us that history is rarely black and white. What seems like a straightforward image can actually be full of layers, contradictions, even manipulations.
It's a reminder to question everything, right? To look for the biases, the agendas, the hidden stories behind the stories.
Exactly. And most importantly, to remember that there are always multiple perspectives on the past. Who's telling the story? Why are they telling it? And what might be missing?
So what started as a deep dive into one image has turned into a crash course in how to think critically about history.
That's the beauty of it. Every image, every text, every artifact has the potential to open up a whole new world of inquiry and understanding.
Well said. And on that note, dear listeners, we leave you with this. The next time you encounter a piece of history, don't just take it at face value. Ask questions, dig deeper, and who knows what amazing discoveries you might make.